Hey guys, so this tutorial is how to make this. As you can see, it looks pretty cool. Let me teach you how to do it. So I know all I did is make a new folder. I got some footage, which doesn't have the best conditions because it's very noisy and not very good lighting. This is around the evening, so it's not in good conditions, but I think if I could show you guys how to do it with this kind of footage, you should be able to do it with any footage. We only need to add the special effects to a certain part of the footage. So first we're going to turn it into an image sequence. So first, let's go into Blender, File, New, Video Editing. And then you're going to want to drag in your footage. Now my footage is not at 16:9, so I'm going to change my resolution. And I shot it at 24 FPS. If you have audio that you want to keep, don't change the frame rates. But if you don't care about the audio, you shouldn't have too much issues. I like doing 24 FPS because it's faster to render since there's less frames. So we're just going to want to find the end of the visual effects. So before I let go to stop the camera, so around right there, and then we're going to end the image sequence there. Okay. And then let's start the image sequence around, yeah, let's just start it at the beginning. Now let's do you could do a JPEG if you're low in RAM, but I like doing PNG. 15% compression, let's bring that down to more like 5. Of course I have a lot of RAM, so I don't need to worry about that, but be careful. Let's go to the file directory, and let's create a new folder called footage. And accept once you're in that folder. So now we're just going to render it as an animation, render, animation, and I'm rendering. And now I just need to wait for this to finish, and then it should be in the folder, and then we can add the visual effects. Great, it's done. One thing I forgot to mention, if you don't want to have to recreate the light and you want good reflections for the tiny details in the webs, you're going to want to make an HDR map. You could do this. I have 2 apps I linked in the description that can kind of give you a good 360 thing for reflections, but you could put it through Photoshop and make a pretty decent HDR map, which is good for accurate lighting, for like the shadow of the web, which is perfect. But now we have a folder called footage I have 218 frames, which is perfect. You know, I have it all the way before I'm even in the frame, and when I'm around the end of holding on it. And notice how my hand is also covering my other hand. That just makes it a little bit easier for to kind of hide the web. So if you have your hands facing the camera like this, it's a little bit easier to hide the web, because if you do it like this, you kind of need to like have it almost inside, and that can get really hard with rotoscoping and such. So try to keep it like this, it's a little bit easier, I find. So I also did this on a tripod, which is very stable, but you could also do it handheld, and you could also even do it first-person handheld. It's up to you. Everything I do can be done on all of them, but you just need to do a little bit more work. So now let's open Blender again. We could close our video editing one, and we don't even need to save that one. Let me close it, don't save. Okay, so now let's create a new file called under VFX. Click Open. Go to your footage. Make sure it's in the right directory. Hover over it. Click A to select all, and click Open Clip. Let's make sure the scene is the right aspect ratio, depending on if you shot it differently. And let's do the correct amount of frames. So I'm going to prefetch my footage, so it's all in the RAM. And it stops right there, so I just need to move it around there. Hey guys, Editor Ethan here. I just realized that I cropped out the frames based off how many frames were loaded. If you don't have that much RAM, that's not reliable at all. Do it based on how many frames the image sequence was originally. Don't do it based off the purple stuff. So now I have all my footage in the VFX, and that's a pretty good start. So now what we want to do is first track the camera. Since I'm on a tripod, this doesn't really do much, but it's just better to have the target. So I'm just gonna detect features, and I'm just gonna track forward. And as you can see, there's very little movement. But now my body gets in the frame, and it kind of ruins all the trackers, or at least some of them. So I'm going to select these trackers and just delete them. We don't need them. As long as you have around more than 8 trackers, you should be fine, unless you have a really complex camera movement. But this should be good. Yeah, the only movement is right here when the camera focuses. Try to avoid that. I didn't avoid that for some reason, but it shouldn't really affect too much. So now we're going to solve. I'm on a tripod. I'm going to refine everything because I shot it on my phone and I don't know the focal length, but if you already know the focal length, put that in there. It does help a lot. I'm going to solve the camera motion. As long as you're below 1, like I'm at 0.0581, which is really good, but I'm on tripod, so but that should be good. Set up as background scene, set up tracking scene, and that's really good. So now let's track the hand. So we're going to create a new object, call it hand or shooter, whatever you want. We're going to go to the part where it starts shooting, so around right, there's a lot of motion blur, so I'm going to say around right there is good. Oh, is it too far? So I have a bracelet here. I'm not going to track it because my bracelet goes a little bit below my arm over here. So it's not very reliable, so I'm just going to track my hand. But I should have used my watch if the camera was on the other angle, because that's a little more stable. So we're going to click track, we're going to click add, and we're going to put it on the hand. Size it to whatever you want. I think that's a pretty good size. We'll find out. And track forward. And it already failed. So we're just going to hold G. We're just going to move it that way. Just going to kind of refine it. Okay, I think it's good. Click here to play. I think that's pretty good. It's tracking the hand pretty well. And because of the keyframes, we should be able to hide that little jump at the beginning. So that should be good. Let's go to solve. Solve object motion, 0, pretty good. I'm not sure if that button's necessary, but I like doing it anyway. But now we have the tracking of the hand and the tracking of the camera. So now let's create a new workspace, general layout. Hit 0 to go here. The camera's off, and I haven't gotten too much luck having the VFX adjust the camera, so I'm just going to rotate it manually. I'm lining it up with my table, because that's a little bit easier to see than the floor. Okay, pretty close. The corners aren't matching up, so I just need to keep on messing with that. And, okay, almost there. That's pretty close. You don't need to be super accurate, but the more accurate, the better. I'm going to scale this ground layer a little bit so it matches my table, which is perfect for shadows. I'm going to do one more thing. I think it's a little bit too big. Okay, I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to duplicate it with Shift-D. Put it on the x-axis, rotate it on the y-axis. Sorry, the z-axis? No, I was right there, original. Y-axis. I'm just going to put this in the right spot. Scale it on the z-axis, sorry. You can tell it's my first tutorial. And I'm going to do it again. Oops, my mouse went flying. I'm just going to go here, and this is just to catch all the shadows that the web will make. So I think that's pretty good. It doesn't need to be super accurate, it's just something to make shadows. And we could raise this and render and see what it looks like. Oh, so here's an issue. It's not transparent. So what we need to do is, first of all, save. So I'm going to switch it to cycles. CPU is fine because of how tiny a lot of the things are, so I'm just going to stick with CPU. I'm going to do 16 samples just for demonstration. adaptive sampling. Go to film, click transparent, and now when you render, it's transparent and there's a little bit of a shadow. It's floating a little bit. The lighting's not very good. It's not accurate. So what we're going to do is we're going to go here, delete that lighting, click this world settings, change color to environment texture, open, and open your HDR that you made earlier. If you didn't make an HDR, just try making the regular Blender lights to imitate real life. But I find this is easier. And then when I click render this time, it might be a little bit orange because that's the lighting of my room. Yep, there it is. And the shadow should be pretty soft because you can see in the video, it was really top down, like my feet are only the ones making shadows, not really the body as much. So that's perfect lighting right here, and it's a lot more accurate. Okay, so we're going to delete that cube, and we're going to make a Shift-A empty plane axis. We're going to go here to Object Constraints, click Object Solver, Hand, and Camera. And now, if I could find it, oh, it's on the camera. So we just need to find out where it is. It's inside the camera, so it's a little bit hard to see. You might need to get out. We're going to want to get and put it on the hand. Now I know in the real world where my body was, it was around here. So I'm going to move this tracker this way. And we're going to put this where the web shooter is. It doesn't need to be on the exact spot that you track the hand. So I'm just going to put it around like where my finger is, there. I think that's good, yeah. And press play and make sure it's all moving. Okay, and this is an issue, but I'm going to explain why that's not an issue later. So then it floats in and then comes in and looks good to me. Now, you could track the table, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to use the camera tracking that we got earlier and this rough primitive of the table to create another plane axis, and that's going to be the target. So first let's name the shooter to shooter, or hand, or whatever you want, and then name the new axis to target. Now I'm just going to move it to the spot that we want. I'd say around right there is good. Yeah, that looks about right. So now we're going to click on this one, the shooter. Shift S, cursor to selected, Shift A, mesh, plane. So now we have a plane. We're going to select one of the vertices in edit mode, Control I to invert the selection, X, delete vertices. Click A to select the final vertice, Shift S, selection to cursor. And now it's centered in the target. We're going to get out of edit mode for a second, go to the target, if I could click it, Shift S, cursor is selected, go back to the plane, edit mode, make sure the vertex is selected, click E, put it wherever you want, Shift S, selection to cursor. Okay, so now we have a line between the two. We're going to click A to select all the vertices, which should be 2. Go over here to the vertice stuff. I don't know what this tab is called. Create a vertice group called pin and click assign. So this is good for cloth simulation, but because of how tight we want the web to be in the video, we're not going to do any cloth simulation. But if you want, you could do some cloth simulation to give it that extra bit of web, especially for swinging scenes. Click one of the vertices, select the target next to it, so this is the shooter, the plane axis. Click Control H, hook to selected object. Go to the other vertice, select the target, Control H, hook to selected object. And now we should see the camera follows the target and my hand. The web follows the target and my hand. And I'm going to change the frame starts to around 120 because we don't need to render the other parts. Yeah, I think that's good. Now let's make a web look like something. So we're gonna go to the modifiers tab. We could kind of shrink those. We're gonna do the screw modifier. I'm gonna put 0.2 for the angle, but you could just mess around with that. And I'm going to do solidify. And you just want to mess around to one that you like. This is just more to personal taste. But I think this is a pretty good start. We could always change it later, since it's non-destructive editing. So now you want to go to the Materials tab, and I already have a material that I made earlier. I'm going to link it in the description for you guys to use. So I'm just going to go to File, Append, for my case. In your case, you might want to do a little bit more things, but I'm just going to go to my previous one and get my web material here. So now go here, apply the web material, and you can't really see it unless you go into render view. So I'm just going to do a quick render. And that looks not bad. Let me just wait for the shadow to load in. Yeah, that's pretty good. The web can certainly be improved. I'm going to move the target a little bit more. Actually, let me go to a different frame and see if it's good there. Don't worry if it's not perfect, because if you have it fast moving, it shouldn't be too big of an issue, especially if you have motion blur enabled. So let's wait for this to render. Okay, that's good. So I'm going to move the shooter a little bit. Zoom in. Whoops. I'm just going to move it a little bit that way, just so that it lines up a little bit better with my hand. Okay, so that's a pretty good start. So now we have a web, but what we don't want just a string. That's just weird, just coming out of nowhere on a random frame. So first we want to add the actual, I don't know what it's called, like a web cone. I have that model in the description, but you could always make your own. So I'm going to add that again for my other scene. Web. I'm going to give it to you guys as an FBX. Okay, so now just click append, at least in my case. And this one came with a target, so I'm just going to remove that. There it is. Okay. This one already has a copy location, so I'm just going to I'm going to move that and show you guys where it is. So add an object constraint to the new cone, or whatever it's called. Click copy location, and add the target. And now it's going to always be in the target location. So we're going to click offset, just so that we can mess around with its location a little bit. We're going to rotate it a little bit. Now it's too much into the table, so you don't see too much detail, which isn't what we want. So I'm going to actually bring up the target a little bit. A little bit more. And then rotate this a little bit more. Move it so it's a little bit in line with this. Okay, make sure you have the web material on it. It already came with its own, which I do not want. Okay, so now if we render this. Okay, so now it's too big, so we're going to fix that a little bit. So I'm going to just go here, set the scale a little bit down. I'm also going to set the scale on the z-axis a little bit down because I want it to be a little bit more flat. I'm going to bring it more up, align it a little bit more, shrink it a little bit more, at least in my case. It's not touching the table, so we want to make it touch the table, so increase its size on the z-axis a little bit, a little bit more. See, this is just a lot of doing it till you think it feels right. I think it doesn't need to be perfectly in line because of how low res the footage is at 1080p. But you can just make it as realistic as you want. I think that's a pretty good size. You could always mess with it a little bit more. I might mess around with it later. So right now we have a good web. It looks very strong. And it looks pretty good. I think I might make it a little bit thicker later, but let's do the keyframes. We want the web to come out of my hand and hook onto the table. We want to give it a little bit of a bounce because webs aren't just straight lines of steel. They're elastic. So what we want to do is get the target. We want to go to the frame where it should be on the table, so around right there. We might move this a little bit later, but we're going to click I'm going to click I, location, to add the keyframe, go to the first frame, and move the target to the other axis, to the shooter. It doesn't be super accurate, it's going to be really fast moving, but I like to keep it a little bit accurate. That's good. Don't worry about the rotation. And we're going to make sure on the first frame, keyframe, location. There, so now it goes onto it. But it doesn't bounce. It feels weird. So we're going to select all the keyframes, click V, vector. I'm going to right-click this edge, horizontal split. Okay, click here. Whoops. Go to graph editor. And now let's go to the Z location. So now let's find where that is in the graph editor. There it is. And we're going to add some noise to it to kind of give it a little bit of a bounce on all axes. So you're going to click this little menu right here. Go to modifiers, add modifier, noise. And now we don't want it to be just shaking the whole scene because that's not, last time I checked, that's not what it happens in the movies. So we're going to restrict frame range. So we're going to change the end to around when the keyframe stops. You just kind of need to eyeball it. I'm sure there's a better way, but I'm just going to eyeball it. And we're going to start it when the first frame starts. And now, see, that gives it a little bit of a shake. I want to end it a little bit earlier. I think that's good. So we're going to copy this node with this button, this modifier, sorry, and paste it here. And now that gives it a little bit of a bounce. I'm going to move this a little bit in closer, like I said earlier, to give it a little bit more speed. Let's make sure motion blur is enabled. Yeah, okay. I think that's not bad. That's definitely not bad. I like that. I think I'm gonna decrease the end a little bit. Yeah, see, it's kind of extruding a little bit, so I'm just gonna decrease that a little bit. Copy that new node, delete this one, paste, delete this one, paste. And that gives a pretty good bounce. It's very, very subtle, but it's good. Because normally webs don't go in and then slow down at the end and then kind of just land there. So it gives it a little bit of a bounce. You might want to increase the noise just a little bit, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. So with the web, make sure this has no keyframes already. So we're gonna want to start to where it's supposed to be at full scale. So we're gonna go to I, scaling, go to the first frame, and scale it down because you shouldn't even really see it. Now the issue is the web is not in the right location, it's too high. So we're going to undo that and undo the first keyframe that we made. We're going to do I, lock scale. And it doesn't lock the scale, that's location and the scale. So we're going to scale it down, and we're going to move it up. Now it's much closer, I'm going to scale it down a little bit more, move it up a little bit more. I, lock scale. And now it kind of grows. Now let's do the same thing with the noise, V, vector. So we're going to do it for all these, location and scale. Actually, it might just be best to do it just for the scale, but it's totally up to you guys on how you want it. So I'm just going to paste the modifier that we had on the X, Y, and Z scale. And I think that gives a pretty good bounce. I might want to scale down the final results a little bit. I feel like that's a little bit too big. I think that's good. So I'm going to just lock scale again. Make sure that's on the right thing. Make sure you're on the same keyframe to overwrite it. I think that's pretty good. And render it in the middle of it just to see the motion blur is acting good. And you could barely see the cone because of the intense motion blur that happens because of how fast it's going. And the shadow, don't worry about like the shadows when there's no webs like right there. It doesn't show up because of how bright it is. But I think that's pretty good. Pretty good so far. Okay. Yeah, that's not bad. I like that. I like that. So I'm going to extend the floor shadow here on the y-axis a little bit, just to give it a little bit more shadow, like on me for the web. I don't think it's going to make too much of a difference, but it's just those little details. And if you want the best details, I'd suggest creating a primitive of your hand to give shadow for that and to place the web more accurately. But I don't want to do that. Yeah, so the shadow's a little bit better. Not very noticeable, but a little bit. So before I forget, we're going to go to the scene settings, click color management, change view transform to standard. Because we want to modify our already existing frames. So we don't want to randomly have different colors in certain frames with the VFX. That's just going to look weird. Okay, I think that's pretty good. So now let's keyframe we could close this graph editor. I don't think we need it right now. Oh. Blender. Okay. So now go to the shooter. Go to the first frame. Whoopsie. Whoopsie. Go into the camera view. Now I started shooting around that part. So I don't really need to move it, but if you started it here and you want to move it here, keyframe its location, and you could add noise if you want, but I wouldn't in that scenario. But I don't think that's so bad. I'm gonna move this a little bit more on the x-axis and on the z-axis. Okay. I think that's good. So now, we should render. So I'm gonna set my thing as a CPU because it's a very small thing, so the GPU just doesn't need to work as hard. I'm gonna do 32 samples. You don't need to go too crazy because of how thin the web is. Speaking of how thin the web is, I'm actually gonna increase its thickness just by a little bit so it's a little bit easier to see. I'm gonna move the shooter a little bit. Okay, so we should be good now. So let's go to the whatever this one's called. Make sure everything lines up, the frame rate, everything. We're gonna render to the end of this frame, okay? I'm going to do PNG because that's the original format we used. And I'm gonna do 0% compression. So that's gonna increase your size, so be careful. Please go to File Manager, whatever you have, whatever platform you're on. I'm gonna go to my file, if I could find it. Here it is. So instead of actually making a new folder, copy this one and paste it. The original folder for the footage. Okay. And then we're gonna rename it to Final. Now we can keep this. And now, when we render the animation, it's going to overwrite existing. Make sure you don't do this in the original footage folder, but it's going to overwrite the copy, which only applies the VFX to the frames that we want. That way we don't need to render extra frames when we don't need it. So I'm just going to wait for this to render. So it's done rendering for me. So I'm just going to minimize that for a second. Okay. So here's the image sequence. So let's turn back into a video. So we're going to open Blender. Make sure this is saved. File, New, Video Editing. We're going to click Add, Image Sequence. Go to our footage. Make sure it's the right resolution, make sure it's the right frame rate, make sure it ends at the right frame. Okay? And let's see how this turned out. Okay. I think I should have probably started the web a little bit sooner, but because of the intense motion blur, it was hard to track. Maybe I could have keyframed it earlier. But if you guys have better conditions with less motion blur, that would probably be best. Maybe slow down your hand. But this isn't bad. So now you can add back your audio here if you had audio from the mic, assuming you were in the correct frame rate when recording. But I'm just gonna select file format as AVI JPEG, and I'm gonna go back here, final, and I'm gonna call this video. Okay. And there shouldn't be too many more settings you need to mess with, so just render animation. So now we're going to close these. You don't need to save this if you don't want to. And here's the final footage. But I think this came out good. Anyway, that's been the tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys want me to do more videos on how to do like HDR maps or how to do VFX or how to do these cool things, I could always do them if you want. That's going to be it.